I think most of us have heard a little bit about the American Critical Minerals Strategic Reserve. For those of us who have not, could you tell us a little bit about just what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I just wanted to thank CSIS for hosting us today. I mean, just what an incredible moment in time, and what an incredible gathering. To see a panel with, guys like Jeff and David Copley and Caleb Orr, and for those of you who are hearing them for the first time, they are truly real-life action heroes in this sort of struggle to not just reindustrialize America, but to bring about real lasting supply chain security. And to our friend Robert Friedland, to my friend, whenever Robert Friedland talks, we should all listen. And there's a tremendous amount to learn and to absorb about the moment in time we're in, and so I think Strategic Critical Minerals Reserve. What is it? How did it come about? President Trump gave us a very clear directive, right? And he said, we absolutely need something to ensure that non-military civilian manufacturers in the United States have the ability to absorb supply chain shocks, right, and shortages. And so the challenge wasn't just that it had never been done before, Rahim. It was that we knew that the way in which he wanted us to deliver it would have to be a very creative solution. It would have to be something that we can move quickly, something that was scalable, something that was designed for not just long-term success, but something that could be a constructive catalyst to the domestic mining industry, to refining and processing capacity that we're trying to build. But most importantly, it had to be financed in a way that didn't require US taxpayers to subsidize it. And the first thing we did, as you can imagine, is we scoured the planet for comps, right? We said, what are the comparable structures that are available? What works? And the very interesting conclusion that we reached is all of the structures that were in place around the world, none of them were a good fit for the United States because it didn't put our best foot forward. And we thought our competitive advantage, if you will, what makes America's economy dynamic and special are a couple key ingredients, right? Number one, it's the magic chair. Number one is, we have, as Caleb said earlier, we have deep, dynamic, robust capital markets. How do we put those to work? We have ingenuity, and with regards to all of our manufacturers. But most critically, and this was the key ingredient that I talked about yesterday with the president in the Oval Office, we had his call to action. And I've, spent my entire career in energy, commodities, critical infrastructure, from being a banker to an investor to a business builder. And I've never seen or had the ability to congregate and convene the best minds, industry leaders, bring them all to the table and have them work constructively to craft a solution. And so where we ended up was a very unique public-private partnership model, right? And so, we started with who benefits the most from a strategic critical minerals reserve. And fundamentally, it's the original equipment manufacturers, right? It's the OEMs. And so, okay, if they're the ones benefiting the most, well, perhaps they should be the ones willing to make long-term financial commitments to make sure it's viable, right? That was our sort of underlying premise. And we said, okay, at the Export-Import Bank of the United States, we have the ability, and amongst many domestic tools, we have the ability to make direct loans to companies, to projects that are looking to bring supply chain security to the United States, to manufacturing, to support jobs, right? And so we've got some fantastic members of the team here. We have my Chief of Staff, Catherine Bowles, Chief Banking Officer, Brian Greeley, Global Head of Origination, Sarah Whitten. So if you haven't met them, you absolutely should. But we said, okay, we think we can contribute a significant amount of long-term, attractively priced capital. And the third piece is we were able to unlock private sector equity, right? So equity capital to be contributed, all crafting, a situation where everybody pitches in, and there aren't any free riders. And so I can imagine you have more questions, but that's kind of fundamentally what we've created and how we got there.
Huh. I like the discussion on comps. One of the comps that people are reporting about is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Yeah. How is this the same? How is it different? How should we think about it?
So let's start with the problem that our reserve is solving for, right, as opposed to Strategic Petroleum Reserve today. So, about 70% of critical minerals that we rely on in the United States are mined outside the United States today. 90% are processed outside the United States today. So and we're also, dealing with the ramifications, and Robert Friedland speaks so eloquently about this, right? Is we're dealing with the ramifications of just-in-time inventory, right? Having been a mantra for so long, not just in the United States, but around the world. And so, we have all of these incentives built around not actually having on hand more critical raw materials than you need today. And so that was sort of what shaped our mission, if you will, for the Strategic Critical Minerals Reserve. And so some of the key differences, right? First and foremost, this is a private sector partnership, effectively. Number two is it is very much demand signal driven by the OEMs, right? So it's not us sitting in a room guessing what we should stockpile and keep on hand. It's the OEMs working with us saying, this is absolutely mission critical for us to hold at these grades, at these quantities over this amount of time. And I'd say lastly, what's really important is everyone's pitching in here. So what we really needed to avoid by way of the president's challenge to us, or his call to action, was we didn't want a bunch of private sector capital, for lack of a better term, stagnant, holding a bunch of inventory, right? It needed to be dynamic and needed to allow for industry to interact with it, to use it as a catalyst for its projects. And so we can talk more about that later, but I think that's a kind of a key distinction from a very traditional petroleum reserve, which, look, is mission critical, right? Has come in handy and will probably continue to be an important tool to bring, supply chain stability to the United States. But we knew that to solve this challenge, we need something more dynamic.
Oh. So just so I can understand, so there's going to be a reserve, and into that reserve, you'll have OEMs nominating what materials they'd like to purchase, and then the vault will go off and go buy them.
Yes. So let me actually flip it for a moment. The OEMs come to the strategic reserve and say, this is what's most critical for us. Right?
Okay.
And we want to partner with the Strategic Critical Minerals Reserve to make sure you can hold it for us for when we need it most, right? And we're willing to make a financial commitment that will make all this possible and feasible. And so I think what was really important, and this I think will appeal to the more financially minded in the audience, is we worked very, very diligently to side by side an OEM using its balance sheet with effectively subscribing to the reserve, right? And we wanted to make it as attractive, if not, look, and for the largest, most creditworthy OEMs whose weighted average cost of capital is quite attractive and low, this is maybe it's a wash, right? Maybe they're paying a little more, but it's worth it to them. For a lot of the mid-sized suppliers, if those, a big question for us was accessibility, right? If this is simply designed for the largest 5 manufacturers in America, we've failed, right? We need to also make sure that it can accommodate some of the smaller suppliers, which really make up the backbone of American manufacturing. So, 95% of companies in America are small, medium-sized businesses, right? 90% of what the Export-Import Bank in the United States does every day is actually support small, medium-sized businesses. And so we wanted to make sure that they could participate as well, right? And so with that in mind, then we drive what is acquired, what is stored, and we make sure that we dynamically give them access to it when they need it.
Got it. I'd like to just zero in on financing for a bit, because
Sure.
I'm a finance guy too. EXIM is providing $10 billion in financing paired with $2 billion in private capital. Can you tell us a little bit about how that risk is allocated between the private and the public side, and if there's room to grow that envelope over time?
So let me start with the last question first, if you will. We've built it from step one in a way that we believe will be scalable and needs to be scalable, right? Because again, we are taking our cues from the OEMs, from their demand, from their needs, which again is a uniquely American way of constructing something like this. It's not top down, it's actually driven from a grassroots level by those who need it most, right? Some of the most creative, thoughtful OEMs are in the room today, and they really contributed to this sort of this brainchild, this thought process. So the way it works is because the structure is reliant upon the credit quality of the underlying participating OEMs, right? We are able to attract really low cost of equity capital participants, right? Because for them, the risk reward makes sense, right? What could be better? A basket of the highest credit quality OEMs, the largest Fortune, sometimes 50, Fortune 100 companies manufacturing in America, giving their long-term credit guarantees to this vehicle, right? Paired with, above us, the stamp of approval of the leading export credit agency in the world, of the largest economy in the world, lending to it. You know what? That risk reward matches with, and they're willing to be a non-participating preferred with a capped upside, but because they know that they have the ability to be in something that has the right risk skew for them.
All backed by the physical assets that are sitting right there in the vault.
Bingo.
I like it. So you've got these demand signals coming from a number of different participants, different OEMs from different parts of the supply chain. You mentioned big businesses, but also smaller and medium-sized businesses. How do you think about the release triggers? Like, what causes you to Petroleum Reserve? The president says it's time, and you can buy from it. Some of these minerals will degrade over time in the vault. How do you think about taking things in and out?
This was a really fascinating puzzle to solve, right? Because there were two things, and I'm gonna bifurcate them, Rahim, if that's okay. There's the what do you do to manage the physical degradation issue, and then there's the what is the trigger for a true, call it an emergency event, right? So the degradation issue is handled in the following way. We actually the structure permits OEMs to withdraw a set amount every year for their own uses, so long as they replenish it to the same watermark, right? So their commitment at time zero will always be the commitment in terms of inventory level that they hold until their commitment expires, right? So that's we thought, a clever way of allowing them to effectively turn the inventory to manage the degradation, right? So that's kind of one end of it. The other end is how do you define, what are the triggers, right? And here's where we also took a very uniquely American approach. So, if we got our friend Robert Friedland back up here, after doing business in 68 countries around the world, he would tell you the unique thing about doing business in America is we do all the arguing up front, right? We really try to hash out all of the key terms at the outset of a deal so that we understand what are the conditions precedent, what are the triggers, what are all the ways in which, what are the conditions under which we are entering this partnership. And that's exactly what we're doing. And so there will be very clear, transparent, visible parameters under which OEMs can come to the vault, if you will, and say, we need this because here are the market conditions that are at play, right? And that's going to be built in and truly something that every single one of these, because every single one of these manufacturers, Mary Barr was in the Oval Office with us yesterday. Some of the largest OEMs have worked with us on this. The number one thing they say they need is predictability, right? They need to be able to plan ahead that they can have what they need when they need it most. And we built that into the trigger parameters, to use your terminology.
It's interesting as you kind of describe this to me. I see one win, which is structuring a pretty neat instrument. But another one is, it sounds like you've got a lot of OEMs and end customers to agree to set aside some capital to have reserves of critical minerals. That must have taken quite a bit of negotiation.
So funny enough, it's actually the opposite. They've agreed to subscribe to the public-private partnership and have the public-private partnership utilize its capital for that purpose. That was the trick, right? Because at the end of the day, they would put together side by side their balance sheet efficiency with subscribing to a forward commitment to repay the vault, if you will, at a future point in time, and say, you know what, that's worth it. But it was not, once we figured out the features that we thought would ensure that everybody pitched in fairly and equally, in terms of their burden sharing and their commitment, we were overwhelmed with interest from the OEMs.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, overnight, that's absolutely grown.
Okay, so all the arguing's done up front, and now we're on day 2 of launch. What's the 100-day plan? What are your top priorities? What are the minerals that are going to make it into that reserve first?
So yesterday was a huge milestone for us. Not only did we approve the largest loan in EXIM's 92-year history, yesterday was our 92nd birthday. And it was also our chief banking officer's birthday. All of that coalesced into one. But I kid, but it really was a milestone because yesterday's final board approval means that all of the definitive final documentation can be put in place and that we could start and commence operations here in short order. So we're laser focused on working through everything that was contingent upon the board approval. So that will be there. But I have to say one thing, and this is kind of maybe interesting for the audience here. This was the best kept secret in town. This is 6+ months around the clock working, where every single day we would wake up petrified when you open your phones and say, of course this is going to leak. Somebody's going to talk about this, right? And so now that it is out there, now that the president very proudly endorsed it, we are also getting inundated with people with very creative ideas of how the vault can be leveraged in a primary or secondary basis, right? And that's sort of what we were always thinking about is, because again, this is a uniquely American approach, right? If I'm going to build something and it's really hard to do and it's really complicated and I got to bring a bunch of people around the table, I want to get the most output from it, right? I want it to not just solve one problem, but maybe it could solve 4 problems, right? And so now we're starting to think through, now the smartest people in the world who perhaps didn't know we were working on this are coming to us saying, hey, have you thought about X, Y, and Z structure? Have you thought about, since the Strategic Critical Minerals Reserve is a large, robust entity that is creditworthy, as well capitalized, to all the miners in the room, right? That sounds like a fantastic counterparty, right? To all the refiners and processors, to all the industrial players. Now all of a sudden they're saying, wow, are there other ways in which we can interact with this entity, with this public-private partnership that we hadn't even thought of? And that's probably the most exciting part, I would say, about the next 100 days, is that creative process that's being catalyzed.
That's remarkable. I'm sure even in this room you'll have a lot of people coming up to you after this presentation with a bunch.
They should really come up to my team because they're way smarter than I am. But.
So I understand how some of the big companies. You mentioned Mary Barra was in the Oval Office yesterday. I know our friend Robert Friedland was in the Oval as well. They'll have access. How about the small and medium companies, right? Like, how do they get access to the vault?
This was truly designed for them because the idea was that they were the companies in the supply chain most exposed to the supply chain disruptions. Because if you're, a Fortune 50, Fortune 100 company, chances are you probably have more pathways to help your manufacturing operations in time of need. What we really needed was the larger players to participate in Vault, which would allow the small, medium-sized companies the opportunity to participate as well. Because if you think about it from a credit perspective, right? If you're a Fortune 50, Fortune 100 company, and you're partnering with the Vault, and you are an anchor, if you will, participant in the Strategic Critical Minerals Reserve, you're unlocking a lot of capacity in that credit basket, right?
Yeah.
For smaller players to participate. And so that is part of the design, is really making sure that it's accessible to small and medium-sized companies in America, because that's when we talk about supply chain, that's what we're talking about. By the way, as you do, we talk to the CEOs of the largest companies in America all day, every day. We aren't really talking about one company, right? They have dozens, sometimes they have hundreds of smaller suppliers that they think about. This is for them. So particularly today, maybe very particularly today, we have a lot of friends and allies in the room. To those friends and allies, is the Vault about America using its balance sheet to
go buy and hoard $12 billion of critical minerals ahead of everyone else? Or how should our allies be thinking about this?
I think now that it's public, I could share a real life anecdote that I think will more than answer your question. Secretary Bessent convened a couple weeks ago a G7 plus ministerial. So he invited the finance ministers of largest economies in the world to Washington. And he was very kind enough to invite me. He also invited Ambassador Greer. And so I actually, in a closed door session, previewed the project to them. And their eyes lit up with the potential to partner with the United States. And this is really what tomorrow is all about. And what makes Secretary Rubio's initiative so remarkable is that what he wants to do is find a way to put America's best foot forward, just as Caleb Orr said up here a moment ago. Economic engagement, economic diplomacy, economic cooperation. Where is that more desperately needed than in supply chain security, right? And so what we're trying to do is de-risk our supply chains, right? And we hope that the benefit will accrue to our biggest and best trading partners, our most strategic allies. And so the discussion then was dominated by all the ways in which we can provide creative pathways to collaborate.
Mr. Chairman, I have one more question, which I know will be topical to many of the miners in the room, which is about your priorities for the next year. This solution is remarkable, innovative, novel, must have taken a lot of time and effort to put together. By the same token, EXIM has put out a lot of letters of interest to a number of mining companies to advance projects in a more kind of regular type of financing. As you think about your priorities, should we understand that this is a shift of kind of what EXIM is looking at to be bigger market-driven solutions, or is it both? How should we think about your priorities?
Our sincerest hope is that if you recognize the EXIM that you've been dealing with for the past few years in what we're doing today, then we're not doing our jobs, right? It has really been, it's been a concerted effort for our entire team to reorient what the bank does all day, every day, around 4 key strategic initiatives, 4 key priorities, right? Number 1, after 92 years, we want to bring the bank back to basics. President Roosevelt started the Export-Import Bank in 1934, explicitly to make sure that manufacturers in the United States can win everywhere around the world. And that is what we try to do all day, every day, because what we know to be true is that means more well-paying jobs here in America. And for me, there's a personal meaning to it, right? My family started over in the United States after World War II, and my grandfather worked at a steel mill in the south side of Chicago. I wouldn't be sitting here were it not for those really well-paying, hardworking American jobs that we want to make sure, thanks to President Trump's leadership and the reindustrialization of America, are readily available here again. Number 1, back to basics. Number 2, we want to make sure that we are the leading economic tool to help bring American molecules and American energy technologies to every corner of the globe. And what we're doing is so loud that we don't even have to talk about it, right? But billions of dollars of US-sourced LNG in the month of December alone were approved and are now shipped all around the world, displacing molecules that would have come from our adversaries and strategic competitors, now are being supplied right out of the United States. That's number 2. Number 3, supply chain security, which we've talked about at length today. And number 4 is how do we help American companies win in the industries of the future? And so we're very, very proud to be a part of the President's AI export plan. My dear friend and actually classmate, Michael Kratsios, is doing a tremendous job at organizing a whole government approach. And so we're very active in trying to figure out how can we creatively and asymmetrically use our tools to help bring a US-led AI solution all around the world. But it's not just that. It's a lot of the dual-use technologies that are emerging. It's advanced mobility. We want to think creatively about how we can unlock that for US companies. And what the mining sector should know is whether it's the supply chain security framework that the President entered into with Australia, which we were a big part of, whether it's all of the great work that we have before us tomorrow in the terrific and very timely convening that Secretary Rubio is doing. We want to make sure that we're a sharp, nimble, and responsive tool, an economic frontline tool to the president and to the interagency as we try to solve these very critical problems.
Okay, well, congratulations on Project Vault. Happy one-day belated birthday, and we'll look forward to coming back here a year from now and seeing a newly revitalized EXIM Bank.
God willing. Thanks, Rahim.